3,000 years ago, Israel grew from a small cluster of tribes to one of the largest kingdoms in the region under the rule of King David. But their great king, who once slayed a giant, was now old and dying, and another would have to take his place. This video is about the kings who came after David and the brutal stories that happened in this holy land. Stories about gods and wars that you've probably never heard before, but are the key to understanding the entire Bible. David's son Solomon was the first to sit on the throne after he passed away. Not only did King Solomon expand the borders of the kingdom and force the surrounding nations to bring him tribute in the form of silver and gold, but he also fulfilled the vision his father David had for him to build a temple for God in the holy city of Jerusalem. A massive building full of gold, expensive tapestry, and most importantly, the presence of God. The kingdom had never been stronger, but Solomon had a dark secret that was about to change everything. Years ago, God had made a promise to his father David that his descendants would rule the kingdom of Israel forever. But if they did evil in God's eyes, destruction would come upon them. Now, David's son Solomon had taken for himself 700 wives from the surrounding nations and 300 female slaves who he used for his own pleasure. No doubt, these wives helped Solomon secure peace with his neighbors, but he broke peace with God in the process. Solomon's addiction for women had led him to start worshiping the same foreign gods his wives worshipped. He even built shrines on various hills in Israel to worship these gods. The Bible calls these hill shrines high places, and it's because of these things that God sends one of his prophets to tell a man named Jeroboam that God is going to give 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel to him. But Solomon finds out about it and tries to kill Jeroboam. So he flees to Egypt, where an Egyptian pharaoh named Shishak protects him until Solomon dies and his son Rehoboam reigns in his place. But the people don't like their new king because he's working them like slaves. Rehoboam was in Shechem when the people rebelled against him, so he fled to Jerusalem, and all the tribes except Judah made Jeroboam their king. Just like that, the kingdom David had worked so hard to build was now split, and civil war broke out over a new border that had formed, dividing the kingdom in half. The kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. In order to secure his land, Rehoboam built a series of fortifications in a bunch of cities near the new border. He also was able to hold on to the city of Jerusalem, which contained the holy temple Solomon had built for God. This was a big deal because even though Solomon had rebelled and started worshiping other foreign gods, most of the people still worshipped the God of Israel, who had given them all of this land to begin with. This made King Jeroboam super nervous. He feared that his people would ditch his kingdom and move back to Judah to be near the temple. So he came up with a plan. He built 2 golden calves in these 2 cities here and told the people to worship these idols instead. But then something strange happened. A man of God from Judah crossed this hostile border to deliver a message to Jeroboam, who was worshiping the golden calf at Bethel. Behold, a child, Josiah by name, shall be born to the house of David in Judah, and he's going to burn all of your false priests on these same altars. Suddenly, the altar split in 2, and Jeroboam was afraid. The kingdom was starting to destroy itself from the inside out, and so naturally, Israel and Judah's enemies started to attack. The first major attack came from the same Egyptian pharaoh who helped Jeroboam escape from Solomon. He sent his army into Rehoboam's southern kingdom of Judah and took almost all of the precious gold that Solomon had collected over his lifetime. But he didn't stop there. He then sent his troops across the northern border of Judah into the kingdom of Israel, where he paid a visit to his old friend Jeroboam and raided his cities as well. What's crazy is that there are ancient inscriptions outside the Bible that confirm the campaign of Shishak, which you can still see in Egypt today. Thankfully, Shishak was not strong enough to destroy Israel, but he did weaken them quite a bit, which is probably why after Rehoboam died, his son Abijah took 400,000 men and crossed the border between Judah and Israel to Mount Zemarain. Abijah told Jeroboam and his army that God was not on their side because they had stopped worshiping the God of King David. But Jeroboam had twice the number of men that Abijah had, and he took some of these men and set an ambush behind Judah's army. When the army of Judah realized that they were surrounded, it cried out to God for help. And the Bible says that God somehow struck Jeroboam's army, giving Abijah's army the upper hand, and in the process captured the cities of Bethel, Ophrah, and Jeshanah, expanding Judah's northern border from here to here. 500,000 troops from the northern kingdom were killed in the process. Finally, there was peace in the land for 10 years. But Abijah did evil in the eyes of God, just like his dad Rehoboam. And after he died, his son Asa took his place as king of Judah. But Asa was a man who did good in the eyes of God. In fact, he is one of the most interesting kings in the entire Bible. Remember all those altars Solomon had built for the foreign gods his 700 wives worshipped? The Bible says that Asa tore them down and commanded Judah to only worship the God of their fathers. But now his faith was about to be put to the test because a foreign enemy was coming to attack, Zerah and his Ethiopian army, and they had double the men that Judah had, plus 300,000 chariots. First, they took Beersheba and then made their way north to Lachish. But Asa cried out to God for help and sent his tiny army down to meet the Ethiopians at the valley of Maresha. Once again, God struck Judah's enemies, and Asa's army chased the Ethiopians as far as Gerar before they fled back to their home in Africa. Everything was going great for Judah until a new king named Baasha took control of the northern kingdom of Israel. And he wanted the territory that Judah had taken years ago, so he gathered his army and retook the land. Now, if he would have just stopped here at the previous border between Judah and Israel, things might have ended more peacefully, but instead, he crossed the line, literally, and conquered the Judean cities of Geba and Ramah. But instead of asking God for help like he did when the Ethiopians attacked him, Asa took some of the silver and gold that was in God's house and gave it to the king of Syria, Ben-Hadad, to try and bribe him to attack Israel from the north. And it worked. Syria sent its troops to attack multiple cities north of the Sea of Galilee, forcing Baasha to withdraw his armies from their southern campaign in Judah to counter the Syrian attack. This allowed Asa to retake the cities of Geba and Ramah, and then fortify the city of Mizpah to prevent future attacks from the north. Asa must have been pretty happy with his treaty with Syria, but God wasn't. So he sent one of his prophets to tell Asa that the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to show himself strong on behalf of those whose heart is loyal to him. But you have chose to rely on Syria instead of God, so now there will be wars in the land. Meanwhile, King Baasha, who did evil in the eyes of God, died, and his son Elah became king. Elah sent his commander Omri to make war against the Philistines at the city of Gibbethon. But while his troops were fighting a brutal war, he was partying with his friends in the beautiful city of Tirzah. That is, until he was assassinated by his servant Zimri. When Elah's army heard that their king was killed, they left the battle immediately, returned to Tirzah, and surrounded Zimri, who was inside his new palace. So Zimri lost all hope and burned the palace to the ground while he was still inside. So the people made Omri king, and Omri made a decision that would set the stage for the craziest years in Israel's history. He made a treaty with Phoenicia and sealed the new treaty with a marriage between his son Ahab and the Phoenician princess Jezebel. At this point in the story, northern Israel was still worshipping the golden calves Jeroboam had built years ago. Even though this was against God's will, many of the people viewed the worship of these golden calves as a way for them to worship the God of Israel, since their land didn't have a temple like the one in Jerusalem. But now that Ahab was king, the new queen Jezebel introduced a brand new god to the nation, Baal, the god of thunder. Now all of the northern kingdom was required to worship this new god, and most of them did. But not everyone. In fact, it's around this time that the prophet Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel to a duel, to see who the true God of Israel really is. And it's in this story that we get a small taste of what Baal worship looked like. The Bible says that people had to start spilling their own blood in order to get this God's attention. What's crazy is that within the last 10 years, archaeologists have found lots of these ancient figurines in the land of Israel that used to be used as idols to worship Baal. While all of this is going on under King Ahab's rule, he gets a terrifying message from an even more wicked king, Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria. Your silver and gold are mine. Your loveliest wives and children are mine. What would you do if an evil king sent this message to you about your family? Surprisingly, King Ahab actually agreed to the king of Syria's request. Meanwhile, there was a new king in Judah, King Jehoshaphat. People really loved this guy. In fact, the Philistines and Arabians respected him so much that they brought him tribute in the form of silver and sheep. But the best part was that Jehoshaphat loved God. His only problem was that he had a soft spot for King Ahab in the north. He wanted to unify the kingdoms, which is why he had his son Jehoram marry Ahab's daughter Athaliah. It's also why he agreed to join Ahab in another battle against the Syrians at Ramoth Gilead. But this time, King Ahab was killed in battle, the Syrians won, and Jehoshaphat had to retreat back to his home in Judah. But now the kingdom of Israel had another problem on their hands. During Ahab's reign over the northern kingdom, the king of Moab paid tribute to Israel. But when Ahab died, Moab stopped paying. So Ahab's son Joram gathered his troops, came down to Jerusalem, asked King Jehoshaphat to join him, and the two armies traveled down to the region of Edom to attack Moab. Even the Edomites joined forces with King Joram. But God gave Israel a promise that he will deliver the Moabites into Israel's hand. But then something really dark happens. Israel, Judah, and Edom start to win the battle just like God said. So the king of Moab takes his eldest son and offers him as a burnt offering on the wall of the Moabite kingdom. But then the Bible says these confusing words. There was great indignation against Israel. So Israel departed from him and returned to their Now that everyone had returned to their own land, a new alliance was forming between Ammon, Moab, and Edom. So the three armies joined forces, crossed the Dead Sea, and made their way toward Jerusalem. This army was massive. So King Jehoshaphat cried out to God, and God responded, "Do not be afraid or dismayed because of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's." So the two armies fought at the city of Tekoa, and I think you know how that battle ended. Now after some time had passed, Jehoshaphat died, but his son Jehoram was not like his dad. His son did all kinds of evil. So God allowed the Philistines and the Arabians to raid the land of Judah and take all the wealth that his dad Jehoshaphat had accumulated as king. And after he died, his son Ahaziah reigned in his place. But this new king was about to be replaced by an evil queen. And how it happens is so crazy. Someone seriously needs to turn this next story into a movie. While Ahaziah was ruling Judah, Joram was still ruling over Israel in the north. When one day, God told one of his young prophets to take a flask of oil, go to Ramoth Gilead, and pour it on the head of one of the captains of Israel's army, Jehu, and say, "I have anointed you king over Israel." Then give Jehu some very specific instructions on what to do next. After